Greetings, diners, and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Cafe here on the Doomstead Diner. Today I am joined by a couple of friends, old friends, Gail Tverberg of Our Finite World and Hugo Bardi of Cassandra's Legacy, and we are here to discuss the results of the Renewable Energy Survey that we have been running over the last few weeks. That survey was inspired by a smaller survey that Hugo did a month or so ago, and I said, well, let's expand on that and see what the Collapse community thinks about it. His sample and our sample come from entirely different groups of people, and to be expected, the results are different. Before we get into that, though, I would like to ask people to who have enjoyed our broadcasts over the years here on the Collapse Cafe to make a contribution to our Sun Foundation, Sustaining Universal Needs. It's a 501c3 nonprofit corporation concerned with developing renewable energy methods, small-scale renewable energy mostly, and permaculture solutions, food production solutions that are sustainable, as well as getting affordable housing to the people that need it. And if you look up on, I think it's going to be on that side of the screen, but it might be on that side, there's going to be a card here for you to make a contribution to Sun, if you so desire, and help us in our mission of trying to make the world a little bit a better place. Okay, now that the plug is done, let's get to the meat of the discussion, which is the renewable survey, the renewable energy survey. And before we go into it in general, you know, you guys' thoughts on what you've seen so far from the survey. Did it hit you as expected? Were these numbers expected by you from this sample, and so forth? Gail, you want to tell us first?
Well, I think they kind of line up with what I expected. Going through this, that most people think that you really can't go to renewables except maybe on a very small scale for a small number of people, and that our group of people that were doing this tend to be an older, well-educated group. Let's see, what other kinds of questions did we have? In terms of the number of people who are going to survive, I think the most popular answer was 1 billion, which was back what we had before renewables, before we started in with the fossil fuels. But I think that person can make a good case that it would be hard to drop back to that level and stick there. It seems like we'd go below it, even if we could come back to that level at some point.
Yeah, those questions about numbers and the speculation about numbers are definitely interesting ones, and you know, I want to cover those in a little bit more detail as we move through here. But you know, let's first look at the education level. Hugo, looking at the number of doctors and master's level people that are involved here or who have been responding, it's definitely larger than the population. What were your thoughts in terms of looking at the distribution? Who is looking at Collapse websites? That surprise you at all?
That's a good question, because I am exposed to different kinds of public. Let's say when you deal with a catastrophistic side like mine, my blog is called Cassandra's Legacy, as you know, so it's frequented by people who have a certain doomerish tendency. And I'm not surprised that the results were the kind of results that you obtained in your survey, because there is a filtering of the people who are really interested in this kind of things. I mean, it's actually it's hugely interesting. This what happens inside of people's minds when they start worrying about the kind of things. Some people seem to enjoy the idea of the collapse, apparently. I cannot understand it so well, but apparently it's Sigmund Freud was talking about death instinct. And maybe this is something that appears here. People love to tell each other, oh, we are going to go extinct. Which, personally, I don't like this so much. So maybe I'm over optimistic in comparison to the average people who frequent your site. And but
And
that's
your
it.
site, Hugo, not just my site. Your numbers of
Not,
catastrophe.
no. That's right. That's all these sides. All these sides. We are the doers, the catastrophists, the Cassandras. So what can I say? It's like this. That's it.
Yep. Yeah, and for the people who are going to get a copy of the spreadsheet, people who dropped on email addresses will be getting a copy of the spreadsheet. There's all sorts of interesting things you can do in terms of parsing up the data. You can see if do doctors think any differently than people who have only a high school education. Do women think about the collapse ideas differently than men? You can do all those divisions, and those things are very interesting to look at, or even more interesting, in my opinion, than the gross results of the survey. With that in mind, let me go to our token female collapsnik, Gail. And Gail, what were your thoughts about the number of women who turned up in the survey? It only came out around 14% women, about 85% or 84% men, and then there were 4 respondents who responded as other. So I left that open for the LGBT crowd and the bathroom controversy and all that stuff. I put that.
Okay, this is a question for you. Don't you feel alone a little bit with all these rumors?
So anyway, yeah. Any ideas on why we're seeing those numbers of women?
Well, I think to some extent, what we're dealing with is a very much of an analytical topic. And so, when you get to math majors and computer science majors and engineers in general, you tend to get a group that tends to be more dominated by men. If you go to the groups that are interested in gardening and in, doing things of that sort, then you get a mix that's more heavily women. But when we looked at it in the oil drum, we got very similar numbers for the percentage of men versus women.
Yeah, and it seems to be pretty ubiquitous across the collapse blogosphere, and most of the websites certainly that I frequent, financial websites also, heavily male dominated. This was the first time though that I got some specific numbers on that. Was interesting to see, and just I can't give you quantification because of the way I had to list our websites, but in terms of which websites were dominant, which ones were getting the most hits and so forth, and had the most contributions, it's pretty evenly distributed between all of the sites, and that kind of surprised me because I only put up an article about it on the Diner and on GEI, Global Economic Intersection. All the rest of the plugs for the survey were just in the commentaries. But even so, everybody's website is very well represented. uh, and so you can look at data from your own websites. See what your readership thinks, if you will. All right, let's go to the meat of the survey, which is starting with Hugo's first question, which is how do you think this transition is going to go? Is it possible? Is it not possible? And Hugo got a very positive response on that when he did his initial survey with a bunch of renewable energy freaks.
Yeah.
But it was not so well received with the collapsniks. So Hugo, you want to give us your feelings on the numbers that you see there?
Well, that's an interesting. I was surprised myself about the response I got from. Because you call them renewable energy freaks, but actually they are scientists. And I thought, honestly, that scientists, since they are trained to reason in a quantitative way, they should understand what the troubles are, because there are big troubles. I'm optimistic about renewable energy, reasonably optimistic, but not at all to the level of thinking that just a small carbon tax will be enough to carry us through the transitions. No way. I mean, these people are experts in renewable energy. They should and they could understand what the trouble is, because it is very simple. It's possible, but it is awfully expensive, incredibly expensive, enormously expensive, unimaginably expensive. But it could be done. We made some quantitative calculations together with some colleagues, and that's, I think, reasonably good science. You can do this. It's quantitative. You know how much energy we need, what kind of resources we need, where can we find them, how much of the energy that we produce today would need to be used. It's possible to make this kind of calculation, but the so-called experts are normally unaware of that. They tend to be very optimistic. They tend to think, no, some people gave me, oh, you didn't mention a number 6. It's that we so fast, the transition, that you would not even realize that we had a transition. You find yourself completely renewable powered, and you would not even know that. And that's a little bit surprising for me. But anyway, I mean, there is a basic point here that no matter what we think, no matter what Ugo Bardi thinks, no matter what Gates Berber thinks, no matter what reverse engineer thinks, the world will think in some way which is based on reality. So something is going to happen, and we will see.
Well, the again, depending on the population that you sample, you're going to get completely different results, as is apparent here, right? So, what I mentioned in my article is that if the people who are interested in developing renewable energy, if you go by collapsniks, people who read collapse sites, they are not making very much headway in terms of convincing these people that it's a possibility. But what about the general population at large? Gail, how do you think that renewable energy solutions and ideas are playing with the general public? Not Hugo's scientific group, not collapsniks, but Joe Sixpack, the average person out there. Do you think that average person believes that a renewable energy future is possible?
I think that the average person listens to the things and they say, well, 50% of the things I hear talk about renewables and 50% talk about fossil fuels, so they must be about equally probable. And, clearly, if they use renewables often in news stories and a lot of people talk about them, then it must be a good idea. And politicians say, at least some politicians say that these might work. That maybe that would work. And besides the scientists, they always have come up with solutions so far, so we can depend on them.
Yeah, the problem you have, and it's like with almost every political and economic problem, is that you get two sides to the issue, and there appear, generally speaking, to be an equal number of experts on that will come to one side or another of the argument, and so the average person is just like, oh, well, I could believe this way, I could believe that way, and which one is more suited to my personal style. It's the same thing with climate change, of course. And then, of course, it comes to who has the most money for the most lobbyists as to what goes through. All right. Well, let's move on from the just those results and look at some of the questions about what the future lies, what the future is for renewables. We move down in the survey here. Folks, this is really hard for me. I have to try to do 3 things at the same time. I have to talk. I got to shuttle between different programs and so forth. Okay, major impediments to replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy. And rank them from the biggest impediment to the smallest impediment. In looking at those results, guys, did you expect to see the storage battery technologies as being considered the biggest problem that we'll have to deal with? Gail, you want to talk about storage batteries and versus some of the other possible problems like the political problems, technical problems, financial problems, and so forth with renewables? Which of those did you really think was the
question up right now is to look at there. It's the kind of thing where they're all problems, and they kind of interact and they act together. So picking out one as being the problem, to some extent becomes a problem. I think when it comes to intermittent electricity put on the grid, you have to have some kind of a storage if you're going to be doing this. Otherwise, you interfere with the pricing so badly. And also, if people are going to use it off-grid, you need it too. So you could argue that the batteries are way up there, but you can make a case for quite a few of those. I haven't found the piece in here as to exactly which one all came.
It's the second one down. It's a horizontal bar chart.
Oh, no wonder I didn't figure that out.
Yeah, it's not a donut.
I think that the major impediment, so that they're saying that the storage battery is the biggest as opposed to, okay. Yeah, well, and the financial, that is generally unaffordable. I mean, that is a deal killer, as far as I'm concerned, because the whole system just doesn't work. It binds up. But then your political, nobody's going to do anything about it, even if it did work. So, and then the technical, that intermittency problems and grid infrastructure, that's very much tied in with the storage battery. This is how we fix the kind of thing. And when it comes to transportation, cannot run on, we can't just switch to electric cars the day after tomorrow, even if we could do everything with electricity. So I think it's a situation where they're all sort of true.
Mm-hmm. And there's a synergy of one problem affecting the other problem, and so it builds on itself. It's not just one problem that you have to face. I mean, maybe it's technically possible, and maybe there's positive EI. Yuko's been writing about that lately on the dispute over how much energy you get back out of the renewables as opposed to what you put into it. So you can argue on each one of these points as to whether it's possible or not possible, but in the end, when you take them all together, it really doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Hugo, you want to treat this issue of multiple different problems existing as far as developing renewables?
Oh yeah, it's very simple. In my opinion, there are no problems. There is only change. What people call problems is simply they say, I want everything as it is now. I don't want any change. I want my car. I want my house with the air conditioning and heating system. I want to take a plane to have my vacations in Hawaii. And that's if you want all this, then you have a problem. But if you think in terms of changes, then we will have changes, and you may not be able to solve a problem, but for sure you cannot solve a change. So let me make you an example. We have been discussing about intermittency. Okay, some people see people in your survey see intermittency as a major problem. But if you see intermittency as a change, then it's a completely different perspective. Say, you like strawberries, okay? Strawberries grow in July. You want strawberries in December, it's a problem. You like strawberries, you can have strawberries in July before the age of refrigerators. So the renewables will be a little bit like going back to the age before refrigerators, uh, where, but I mean, our ancestors survived without refrigerators for a long time. So, and besides, refrigerated strawberries are not so good. So, in renewables, you have to be used to have intermittency. That's a change. It is not a problem. It's a different point. And so, at least you can have energy, not every in every exact moment when you want it. It's a different kind of management of the energies, like strawberries. You cannot say to people it's useless to cultivate strawberries because you cannot have strawberries for Christmas. And you will have to manage a system which is intermittent because you have no other choice, basically. And so you will be happy with the change, or you will not be happy with the change, but the change will take place anyway.
Well, and it's the question is, with those changes, how well will uh, our societies hold together? Can they manage those changes and still, you know, have a general look and feel similar to the modern techno society? Or are we bound to, descend to, 17th century lifestyle? Is that where we're headed, or further back than that, 13th century, or are we destined to be hunter gatherers? How big are the changes going to be resultant from whatever type of changeover we're going to accomplish? Gail, what do how do you see that changeover, or Hugo's vision of an intermittent energy world? Do you see that as workable?
Well, I see our big issue being our financial system and also our international trade system. Our financial system depends on being able to repay debt with interest. And our international trade system uh, depends on being able to be paid for the goods we ship overseas. So once you start getting those systems to have problems, then you have a real problem. We're going to have to get around that issue because, you depend on the banks to, if you're an, say, electric company, you need to pay your employees. And if the bank is closed, it's hard to do that. So it's that kind of issue that we're going to have to deal with. If you go back to the 17th century, we had a lot of things in place that we don't anymore. I quite often show kind of a child's toy that's kind of built up an open grid as to what our economy being a networked economy. Everything depends on everything else. We have a situation where we have things all set out, where we're raising horses, say, because we're expecting to use them for labor, and we're raising other kinds of animals in the fields because we expect to use them for food. And we have everything figured out. We have schools that are training people to do things in the way that they did them in the 17th century. But when we get away from the 17th century, none of us would know how to go about doing the things. Well, very few of us would know how to go about doing things if we had to go back to the way before fossil fuels. I mean, there are a few people who, as a hobby, make paper, but we would have a hard time making the quantity of paper that we use today, or even a small fraction of it. It would be awfully hard just to make big changes, and it's hard to know how much the system will stick together. So in terms of come out badly, I expect we'll have different groups trying different things in different parts of the world as to how to compensate. There may be some hunter-gatherer groups someplace, and there may be some other people trying to do it at a more advanced level. But only time will tell as to which ones are most successful.
And which then brings us to the question of which types of renewable energy are most likely to succeed versus least likely to succeed. And on the level of sample and who you're talking to, this one I think is one that is goes beyond the collapse community as an interesting question. Of course, collapseniks mostly think that nothing's going to work. That's if you look at the chart on that, that's the third one down the bar chart. Most collapseniks thinks nothing's going to work. But if you drop past the nothing's going to work to the maybe something will work, one of them is I think the next biggest choice is slave labor as the most plausible form of renewable energy that will be used. Before I hand out my thoughts on that, I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts on the future of slave labor as a renewable energy. Hugo, you want to speak to that one?
That's a very interesting point. Slave labor is not very efficient. That's one of the problems. So it's possible that we go back to slaves. Why not? Slaves have been a common feature of human societies for the past 5,000 or 6,000 years. So they could go back. One of the comments I got to my blog, I have a small blog in which I discuss cultural things, and I was discussing about slavery in the Roman Empire, and somebody came up and said, what's so wrong with the slavery? It's a good thing. And so, well, we may go back to that. Why not? But it's a different story. That means that's real collapse. You collapse so badly that you go back even before the Middle Ages. You go back to a situation in which some people were slaves of other people. But that's a possibility. Why not? A certain probability. I don't know which probability, but it is not very interesting, I think, because we already know what slavery is, and it was not so much fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, certainly not.
Especially for the slaves.
Right. Gail, what are your thoughts on the plausibility of slave labor and slavery returning to our societies in the post-fossil fuel era? That is, regardless of whether we get renewable energy substituting for fossil fuels or not. Do you see slavery as a plausible route that the society may be taking?
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind is just as you get more and more wage disparity, I think some people, who are now having trouble finding jobs that pay minimum wage for 20 hours a week, they feel like they aren't even being able to live at the level that a slave would live. And if they could find somebody who said, "Oh, you can work for me, and I'll give you, essentially a contract for a full-time job, and I will provide you with room and board, provided that you work, 70 hours a week, they might take them up on it. It's a kind of a situation where one thing kind of morphs into another. You have a bad situation already, and people would be happy if they were guaranteed a job. So you end up with these interns on these growing food, for example, and they're not
workers.
paid. All they get is their room and board and the chance to learn how to operate the organic methods of growing food. Well, are they slaves? Well, no, they voluntarily went and did it. But I think you may start seeing some people, just because this would be a way that they would not starve to death if they see the majority of the world headed in the direction of starvation.
Yeah, well, I think that trading of your labor, basically just for shelter, food, and clothing, as you mentioned with the woofers, has already occurred to an extent. But what I look at it in terms of, and then this is, Hugo brought this up, is that human beings as a work animal are terrifically inefficient. It costs a lot of money to maintain a slave. You have to house the slave, you have to provide all the slave's clothing, and you have to provide him with enough food so that he is renewable for work the next day. If you're not providing enough of those things, then your slaves are not renewable because they die. And so its overall efficiency level is very low. And I think slave societies really need a very large surplus to operate. They can't operate in a deficit any more than a society based on fossil fuels can exist. So I don't see the future of slavery as being very good. At least that's not to say it won't happen, but as a renewable form of energy production, no, I don't think that works. You're gonna animal labor is going to work better than human labor. But then let's drop down to the actual real quote-unquote renewables and the ordering that was done there. At least among collapsniks, the smaller scale versions are more well thought of than the large scale versions. The big solar farms, out in the desert, and the big wind turbine farms up on the mountains and whatnot, as opposed to individual small ones that are not grid tied. Looking at those possibilities, Hugo, have you investigated differences between these different types of renewable energy production in terms of how they might work, or do you just kind of look at it all as one big glob called renewable energy?
Well, there is an interesting point here I think I could make, and it is that we have been seeing a major ecosystemic revolution during the past 50 years or so, which is the development of photovoltaic technologies. Look, this is a real big revolution. Unbelievable. It's something, it's a change, a radical change, nothing like that had been seen on this planet for the past 3.5 billion years. Because you see what the current biosphere is doing. It's transforming solar light into electrons, that's done into special molecules which exist in cellular systems which are called chloroplasts, and it's a very complicated story in which this electron jumps from one level to another, moves from an atom to the other, and then it is used to strip hydrogen out of water, and this hydrogen then is used in a hugely complicated system that transforms this hydrogen into something else, and then eventually you make ATP or A in order to power
the electron transfer
system. The electron, this is photosynthesis. It's called photosynthesis. It is electron pumping, essentially. Now, for the first time in the Earth, during the Earth history, there's a substance that never existed before because it never existed on the surface of the Earth. Metallic silicon has appeared. Now, this metallic silicon can be doped in such a way that it can do the same thing that can be done in chloroplasts, but it can do it more efficiently, much more efficiently, and without the need of all the kind of strange and delicate apparatus which is needed by plants. So it's a major new metabolism which is now appearing on the surface of this planet. This is a major, major, major revolution. Do you think that when the eukaryotes or whatever, I mean, you can think life, the appearance of life maybe 4 billion years ago, maybe 3 billions and a half. Okay, now you could say that was just an introduction. Now life is really appearing on the Earth. With this new system of photosynthesis, this new metabolism, now life is going to appear on this planet and it's going to do things. And we will see a lot of changes.
Well, the question is, of course, the cost of manufacture of those wonderful chips and the mining necessary to get the materials for it. And I think as everybody who's ever walked by any mine knows, or any production facility for stuff, that it produces a lot of waste along with the good stuff. In fact, usually it produces more waste and more pollution than the stuff that you actually want to get out of it. That's been the case for almost everything produced by industrialization, is the huge amount of waste that is not accounted for, and then the disposal of that waste. And of course, nuclear energy supposedly was, going to give us energy too cheap to meter, right? But nobody ever really took into account the cost of decommissioning all the nuke plants and all of the nuclear waste that there is. I mean, what's the waste production in terms of making photovoltaics? And those are questions I've never had a satisfactory answer to. But Gail, what about, how do you look at those different possibilities of different types of energy production from the renewable end, big scale versus large scale, photovoltaics versus wind, etc.? Do you see any differences or anything more plausible or less plausible?
Well, I think the big issue is how long you can keep anything going. If you have a problem and you can't pay your workers, you have a problem no matter what it is, and you can say, well, I can keep my large-scale hydro going. Well, you can keep it going for a while, but at some point you're going to need replacement parts. I know with wind turbines, they're especially sensitive to needing exactly the right kind of replacement. So if the business that made your wind turbine has gone out of business, there's a good chance that you're not going to be able to get a replacement part for your wind turbine, and you're going to have to call it a day with that particular wind turbine. But when you start getting very delicate systems, you can't just substitute any old thing. And as you start having failures within the system, then the whole system tends to go downhill very quickly. So even though it's called renewable, I think there's a good chance that, say, adding a bunch of them to the grid is going to make the system fail sooner rather than later. It certainly doesn't extend their life, the grid's life.
Well, and you've got the big problem that the grid as currently designed is not really set up for the kind of intermittency that's involved, and upward and downward spikes of the amount of voltage being produced and whatnot. So you would need just about an entirely new grid here to get this working in any fashion. It runs back to that question of so many different problems that are interrelated and that make it hard to imagine, at least hard for me to imagine, how it's going to happen. Hugo's imagination is better than mine on this. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And these last two questions, I think, were the ones that I found the most interesting. You know, it's pure speculation, and it's pure speculation of a bunch of people who think the world is going to end, or at least the world as we know it is going to end. So the results, of course, are reflect that attitude in this group. But I think the first of the two questions is that what year will you see? We expect to see brownouts and blackouts and oh no, sorry. The first question is, if we could make a full conversion to renewable energy resources overnight with the current climate conditions, how much would be the maximum population that the Earth would support? And the consensus opinion amongst doomers is 1 billion people as the most likely outcome from this. Now, based on that, I mean, first you can give me your opinion on what you think the numbers are going to be as we move through this procedure. But my question, I guess, related to renewable energy is, how do you implement, assuming that this is correct and we're going to have this large die-off over some period of time, how do you implement renewable energy solutions in the midst of a major die-off of human population? And then secondly, here's a real interesting question to ask yourself, is assuming we did have such a die-off, and it was virtually instantaneous, say, over a 10-year period or something like that. I mean, just burying people would be hard, but assuming you did, then you have a whole lot of fossil fuels left for the remaining population, plus any renewable energy systems that you did build now only have to work for a much smaller population. So as the population shrinks, whatever you built out in the process of the die-off has an increased effect in terms of being able to make the smaller population survive. These are two things that are working against each other, right? So that's a long and complicated question, I realize. But let's go with Gail first this time. I think I've been leading off with Hugo the last couple of times. So Gail, how do you respond to all that?
Well, basically, I don't see our being able to keep up the electric grid. So whatever you've put on the electric grid, it's basically a question of, well, okay, we've got these wind turbines. If somebody somewhere can figure out some way to make them produce fertilizer or something, okay, that's nice. And if some people someplace can take those solar panels that they've got connected to their rooftop, and they can connect them up in a different way so they can use them locally, you know, I think that's the direction we're going. I don't see that the grid is going to be useful for the long term. And in fact, I think it's going to get worse and worse as we undercharge for renewables. Because what happens is that the cost of the grid actually goes up over time, you know, as it becomes more and more complex. And so we're going to have this full cost regardless of how many LEDs we put in to reduce our usage and regardless of how much renewables we put in there. And so this grid is the overwhelming big problem of how we keep that going. And I don't see it keeping going. So putting all kinds of stuff on it is sort of a waste of resources from my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with you on most of that. Hugo, where are you as far as that long and involved question of how many people?
You asked a lot of questions, but the first question about how many people could survive the transition. Now, I don't think I can say anything interesting on this point, except for the fact that, curiously, I find myself in agreement with the majority of your survey. If you were to ask me, just like you asked me, who will win the elections in the United States, and I could say 1 billion. A number that sounds right, but that we don't know. We have no idea. It's the point is actually that as we said at the beginning, we are going to go through a Seneca collapse. There is no way to avoid it. We are going to go down very fast, and that will probably destroy a lot of infrastructure. We destroy also a lot of people, unfortunately. But it would theoretically possible to avoid it, but I think it's really, really too late. So this will be a very big creative destruction. This will change a lot of things, but the point is that after the Seneca collapse, which is creative destruction, it will create something new. And we may be propelled back to Middle Ages, that's perfectly possible, or to extinctions, that's also perfectly possible. But we could go to another world, a different world, where we maintain electricity, for instance. We may not lose electricity. If we don't lose electricity, I'm sure, and Gail is perfectly right, the current grid was built for certain purposes and with in mind certain energy sources, and so will not survive the transition. It will be a completely different kind of grid if there will be a grid. For instance, I was discussing with some people just a few days ago, say, why do we have a high voltage lines? Why do we have 220 volts in our homes? Actually, in the USA, you have less than that. But my friends who are engineers said that your house would run best with 48 volts. And that's a completely different story, because 48 volts is something you can make a local grid, or you can make your house independent, more or less, from the grid. You don't have
48 volts DC or AC?
Good point. I think DC. I think they were meaning DC. I'm sure of that. DC. And then you can charge batteries directly. You don't need inverters. You don't need transformers. You can do a lot of things, and will be especially suitable for renewable energy, which produces low voltage normally. You need such a thing that you call an inverter to go from photovoltaic panels to the grid, and an inverter can do the job, but it's something that you would be happier if you didn't need it. So the possibilities, I think, are many and very interesting to re-emerge in a world which may be actually better than the present one, because the present one, I think, is a little bit unstable and violent and nervous and a little bit nasty also. So I am sure we can do better. The question is that whether we can do that. And the point that I'm trying to make is that what we invest today in renewables will help us to go through the transition and survive it a little bit better if we survive it.
Yeah, and I agree with that point too. I think, despite the fact that I don't see renewables as a substitute for fossil fuels, and I don't think that renewables can...
They are not a substitute. They are not. Absolutely not. They are a completely different thing. It's another word.
Yeah, it's not a substitute, and it's not going to maintain us in the style that we have been accustomed to, but that doesn't mean that that they can't be useful in transitioning to whatever we're going to end up in. And but then the important point is, if you do believe that and do accept that, then what type of renewables are you going to do your investment in? And the problem I see is that the big investment money is going towards things like the big wind farms, all things that have to be grid tied in. What we really need is to develop small-scale, non-grid tied solutions that are community-based. Those are going to be more resilient, and they should be the simplest systems possible. You mentioned 48 volts DC. I run almost everything either 36 volt or 48 volt. All my DC stuff does that. Everything you see behind me runs DC stuff. And the reasons for the high voltage lines and so forth is because transmission over large distances for stuff, when you use central systems, they need high voltage so that there's less loss along the line. and AC also has less loss than DC over large distances. So, that's why the electric grid evolved the way it did, because it's a central conduit scheme. It makes money for a small group of people. And that's a whole way the whole society was designed. But that's a political question, not for today. Okay, so let's go now to I've done that little diatribe. Let's go to the last question on the survey, which is the date. When is the real crunch going to come in the first world countries? I used the FS of A, Fascist States of America, as my example, but I'm really talking about Europe, Australia, China, which has developed quite a bit over the last 20 years industrially and become dependent on fossil fuels. When will these countries, not India, not places that are already experiencing the blackouts, brownouts, and shortages. I mean, you're already seeing it in Venezuela. You're probably almost all of South America has problems now in one way or the other as far as generating electricity is concerned. Drought has been a big problem there, and a lot of their power is hydroelectric, considered renewable, but not renewable if you have no water. So when will those problems start to hit the first world? And the consensus opinion there is about even between 2020 and 2025. Hugo, what do you see as when these, you talk about the Seneca Cliff and that we're going to go down and go down fast when we go. So when do we start skiing down the other side of the hill? And when are these problems really going to hit the first world, in your humble opinion?
In my very humble opinion, there is a chance that renewable energy may pick up the slack, at least in some regions. I see more as a problem in the range here, 2020, 2025, 2030, that droughts and global warming will cause so much damage in the equatorial and tropical countries that blackouts will be seen as a minor problem. And but yes, really, I would say humbly, very humbly, my very humble opinion is that blackouts don't seem to be such a terrible problem. That's my modest opinion.
Well, certainly the real apocalypse community, people who talk about apocalyptic problems and zombies running wild and all that good stuff, see the grid down scenario, the lack of electricity. Yeah, it's okay for people can handle it for 2 days, 3 days or so, but when the whole grid is down for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, and there's just no electricity, that people will essentially go berserk because of all the services and all the things that are dependent on electricity. Gail, where do you sit on the time frame, and then how do you see those blackouts affecting us socially, depending on the length of time of the blackout or brownout?
Well, I guess the way I see it playing out is what you get is financial collapse. And it's a financial problem, and it's the banks that are closed, and it's related to this. And of course, what you get also is different countries behaving differently. You have the Greece of the world, Greeces of the world, and you have the Venezuelas, and you have countries one by one progressing downward and collapsing in different ways. But it seems to me we're starting to have some countries heading in that direction. So in 2017, we may very well have some countries heading in that direction. I don't know how long we can keep the financial system together. It's going to be the financial system that collapses first, and then when you have the financial system collapse, then that's going to be very much tied in with, can you keep your gas stations open? Can you keep the electric system running? Can you keep the government in place? So all of these things fit together. I guess I could see things falling apart pretty badly by 2020, but I've been wrong all along. You know, it could push off to 2025. It's all of these things seem to have more resilience than you'd ever expect.
Yeah, you know, as far as being a Nostradamus or a Cassandra is concerned, the hardest part of the job is hitting the timeline correctly. You might be correct in your observation of overall trends, but if you can't pick out when it's going to occur and pick it out correctly, it's not that helpful for people in terms of their planning and so forth. And you also suffer the problem of the boy who cried wolf, where you call for massive destruction at some point, and then it doesn't come, and so you look like an idiot, right? And the more times you do that, the more idiotic you are. So it's kind of a no-win situation for Nostradamus to put a precise date on this.
Exactly. Never do that. That's a no-no.
Yeah, and that's why the original Nostradamus was pretty cagey about his date and his predictions, right?
Smart.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, like I said, if you don't make such predictions, then for people to plan, it's very hard. What I get asked on the diner all the time is, you know, I mean, do I need to move off grid today? No. Or is business as usual going to last 10 more years, and I should stay in my job in the big city making, you know, $100,000, $200,000 a year? And, you know, I mean, I can't advise them on that one. I can't tell them which one's the better choice. It'd be better to move out today if the crash happens tomorrow, but if we go for business as usual another 10 years, it's better to stay in the city, right? Because make more money to buy more preps. So the timeline question makes things really difficult. Myself, I went on the long side on that one. I went for 2025 before the shit really hits the fan, at least in the fascist states of America. I think they'll find still more ways to duct tape together the system. Command economy is quite possible after a crash of the monetary system. So
perfectly possible. Likely, I'd say the financial system cannot manage a Seneca collapse. That's clear.
Yeah, definitely not. You know, just on that subtopic of command economy scale, have you considered that possibility and how command economy might be substituted for our current financial system to resolve those problems?
Go ahead, Gail. Your turn.
Yeah, go ahead, Gil.
Okay. Well, well, I'm not sure that how we would really do it. We're talking about pieces around the world. And so the issue is not just the U.S., it's the whole world. You know, it's the fact that we need computers to do everything. And to get computers, you have to get the computers that are made in China or wherever, because we don't make them in the U.S. anymore. And those computers are made using imports from around the world. So you've got a whole big system, and your command economy, even if you can make it work for a little piece of the system, doesn't really fix the whole thing.
Yeah, well, you know, the computer problem and so forth, while they are manufactured over in China, I mean, we just have zillions of them here, and you know, the computer chips are in your phones and just about everywhere in your cars. Those things can all be taken and repurposed, you know, if necessary, in a command-style economy for the purpose of keeping the grid running or not the electric grid, but the financial grid and the internet and so forth. I think that can be kept running for quite some time without need for further imports from China and so forth.
Well,
In
you've
terms of
got awful lot of special purpose things right now. And if something goes bad, you need a substitute that exactly matches. Very
yeah,
often.
I mean, yes and no. I have friends who are geeks, and I'm a geek of sorts, but it's amazing what you can do with a few chips and how you can rewire them and put together working systems out of it. You get a bunch of geeks together in a room and put enough hardware in front of them, and they'll figure something out. That's just the nature of being a geek. So, I don't see an instantaneous failure on that level. And to me, it's more of a political issue of how the government and the military uh, can respond in a situation of financial collapse, and what those responses are, and whether the people at large accept them. So those are all uh, uh, unknown unknowns and unanswerable questions. You can speculate on them, but you can't give any uh, firm answer that it's a guess. It's a wild guess, right? All right, Gail. Before we wrap up the show, you had some other topics on renewables you wanted to go into. You want to fill me in on that?
You just put up a couple of some graphs I had there. I can kind of go through those 4 graphs that I sent you. They may be in some sense a little elementary, but I thought that maybe the topic needed a little bit more discussion of a few other related areas. Could you put up at least the first 2, and then we'll move down to the other 2. I think you had the 4 together there.
Yeah, I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
It's not so fast or easy. I think I got it on screen correctly. Okay. Start screen share. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That should be up on your screens now.
Right. Okay. Over at the left on the top is the Seneca Cliff, and that's really Hugo's graph. And I think that's sort of the way things will play out. And I think that's what quite a few people think is the way things will play out. And that's what happens when you have multiple different problems attacking at the same time. You have financial problems, you have climate problems, you have oil limit problems, you have water limit problems. There's just so many different things, and it's the interaction that causes them to go down quickly. There's also, people talk about the Hubbert curve, but the Hubbert curve is something that's the second one over to the right. This is at least one of them from Hubbert's, one of the first of Hubbert's papers, but he's got several graphs similar to this in his later papers. And when he talks about a symmetric Hubbert curve, and that's the one between minus 1,000 and plus 1,000 years from the present, the fossil fuels, and they go up and they go down. What he assumes is we have some other kind of energy that comes into place first. And that's not the situation that we have. And in fact, if you think about it, energy is what allows us to have all the kinds of goods and services we have today. So if he's assuming nuclear energy in huge quantity, what he's basically assuming is everybody will be extremely wealthy. That because with all of this energy, we can operate as many copper mines as we want, no matter how depleted they get. Our energy we have will allow us to use more and more depleted resources. And our energy will allow us to get all the water we need by doing desalination. And, we will be able to solve every other problem. So the only problem we have to worry about is fossil fuels. Well, you can get a symmetric curve under those circumstances, but that's not really what we're working against. We're working about a real world situation that has a lot of things going on, which is why I think we're dealing with more of a Seneca cliff, which is the first curve. It's a much more, it's faster down, it's slow up and faster down.
Yeah, it's like it's like skiing. Even if you take the chairlift, it takes a while to get up the slope. But on the downhill, you get down a whole lot faster than you went up. So Hugo, since Seneca Cliff is your
brainchild,
your contribution to the world of collapse.
Humankind.
Yeah,
Humankind.
somebody had to be responsible for that shit.
Yeah.
How do you look at this? The difference between the Seneca Cliff and Hubbard's original fairly symmetrical prediction, and I love that nuclear energy line there. The way it just goes up and then flatlines across, like it's going to hit some limit. I mean, where was he getting his projection for that? It was going to hit.
Hubbard was a great optimist. He was a special kind of person. He was was a technocrat. Much before thinking of peak oil, he was thinking of a world ruled by engineers, by reverse engineers. Who knows? Anyway, so that's anyway this. That graph comes from 1956. It was very, very long, a lot of time ago. It looks unbelievable that some people could think of something like that. But anyway, they were optimistic. But let me ask you a question. You asked us a lot of questions. Let me ask you a question.
That's why I run these shows, Hugo.
Yeah.
That's my job.
Do you think there is life after catastrophes? Let me explain. It's that I find myself a little more optimistic now. I feel better, see the future in a more detached way, but I see some future. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of the people who gets in the biggest arguments with the extinction crowd. I am constantly on top of them. My statement is, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. I believe that Homo saps can come through this period. I just don't believe that we will come through it with anything resembling the kind of technological society that we currently have. I also believe that the population of the Earth will be substantially less. My estimation on what the Earth could support when I answered my own question was below that 1 billion. I answered 100 million. I think it might be plausible that 1 billion people could inhabit the Earth sustainably, but even without future climate damage, the amount of arable land and the amount of water table depletion that we have done and so forth, in the absence of the copious amounts of energy that we're currently inputting, I don't think we can support 1 billion people. So I drop down to the next level of 100 million. I think that's plausible, even with coastlines disappearing and a shrinking size of the Earth. I also believe, well, a lot of people don't think that Homo saps can survive past a 4 or 5 degrees C warming. I think it's perfectly plausible that human beings could survive 10 C, and the system plateaus out about 10 C or so above the pre-industrial baseline. It has in every prior era. Anytime there was a global warming and sequestered carbon was released into the atmosphere, up to 4,000 parts per million, I think, one point, it always plateaus at that level, and then eventually carbon gets re-sequestered, and then we go through another cycle. What is driving those cycles, I don't know, for sure. But one of my contentions is that it's not strictly a Homo sap problem of fossil fuel burning. I think there are geotectonic cycles that are involved here. There are increasing earthquakes, increasing energy release through volcanism. There's a lot of straight old thermal convection that comes through from the ocean floors. I think a lot of ocean warming that we have experienced is resultant not from anthropogenic causation, but from our own Earth, and it is heating up for some reason. What that is, I don't know for sure, but I do see all the signs of increased energy release, and I have written on that topic fairly extensively. So anyway, okay, let's go to those last two charts that Gail had. I'm going to have to scroll down the screen here. Let me see if I can get to that. Do-do-do.
See how this works.
Where's the cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, they should be center screen now.
Okay.
What?
All right, so we got residential electricity prices and world energy consumption.
Well, this is residential. Yeah, let's look at the left one first, the residential electricity prices in Europe, and then the average Germany spot price, just because Germany is the biggest market. The person who put this together was in Denmark, and he said that Denmark mostly just copied off of the Germany spot prices. But the problem that they're having with electricity is exactly the same problem we're having in the U.S. with electricity, and the same problem we're having with oil and coal and natural gas, and that is that the prices are dropping. You look at the spot prices, which is the wholesale prices, they keep going down farther and farther. And what's happening is they're having to pay bigger and bigger subsidies for the renewables. And in fact, they're even having to pay subsidies to get the fossil fuels now. It's just getting to the absurd point. But that's the same situation we have with the oil. The oil companies can't make a go of it on the $50 a barrel, but the natural gas companies can't make a go of it on their price levels. And the coal companies, we've had a bunch of big ones go bankrupt. And this shows this electricity issue too. And I think this is the financial issues that's pushing us in this direction. And you dump a whole lot more on the grid, and it tends to make it worse. I think Denmark was saying, at least according to one article, they've cut off buying new offshore wind just because the amount of subsidies has gone up so much. It's not just the fact that they're adding more renewables, it's the fact that the regular price is dropping too. And so I forget exactly what the percentages were. I think they were going from 44% subsidies to 67% subsidies per dollar of electricity that they're now having to pay in Denmark. So they're not adding more. It's just so absurdly expensive. So anyhow, and of course you're seeing the upward trend in costs everywhere with it. Then the other thing was something I put together just with the new BP Energy report that came out in the last week, and it's just showing the different types of fuels: oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear, hydroelectric, and then I should probably call it other renewables, which is the orange up on top. And I think people who have been following this know pretty well how they fit together. But basically, what's happened is the big increase in coal we had is what has kept things together economy-wise for quite a while, because it's a cheap fuel. And now that's flattening out. But the renewables, you can see them there. I think they come to, well, I guess when I looked at just electricity, they were up to 7% of electricity, but as a percentage of total energy consumption, they're something in the, 2-3% range. And if you look at, this doesn't have biofuels, but worldwide biofuels come out to less than 2% of the oil supply. So, so often when people listen to these people talking on TV, they hear this 50-50 story of, oh, renewables will save us. Well, when you look at the actual small numbers and how slowly they're increasing, it becomes a problem. Oh, one thing I looked at too was, I didn't show it on this graph, but I was looking at electricity, and I was looking at what percentage of our electricity had come from nuclear and from hydroelectric. And for quite a while, this percentage was dropping. Uh, and in fact, with nuclear, I think it still is dropping, because as your need for electricity goes up, they weren't increasing correspondingly. Recently, the hydroelectric has been going up, but just even staying even with those which are supposedly the ones that are low carbon is difficult. So, and then when you add these renewables, which includes geothermal, and it includes wood, wood chips and sawdust and things like that, besides wind and solar, you can see it's kind of a small amount even to try to deal with, the others are so big in comparison, it's hard to make much progress going to renewables.
Yeah, it's a scale up issue and scale problem. Looking at all those numbers and those different graphs, myself, I mean, the one thing that's very apparent is the dip right here. I think I've got my cursor on it. Oh no, I have to be on the other screen. But the dip that you see right just before 2010, which is really basically 2008, 2009 in the world consumption by fuel. And that, of course, corresponds precisely to the financial crisis and recessionary period that we went through at that time. So you can see how closely tied consumption of fuel is to what's going on in the financial economy. Hugo, you got any stuff? Gail, by the way, you got a typo in that graph. Consumption without an M.
Yeah, I guess I better get an M in there, huh?
But Hugo, you got any thoughts on those consumption patterns and
well, it's fine. Gail had a very good description here. I would say that the financial system is not able to control the situation. Clearly, we're going up and down, and we have crises and bubbles and collapses of all sorts. It's clear that such a free market, theoretically free market system just cannot cope with the situation as it is now. And then we are going, I think, to a sort of command and control economy, or simply control economy. And that's nothing new. It's a typical wartime economy. It's existed in the past, and when there is a shortage of resources, the government takes over and controls the resources and distributes them, not according to the free market. That's it.
Yeah, the end of free market and capitalism. I don't think there ever was a free market. I think that it has always been manipulated from behind the scenes. But even the veneer of such a thing, I think, is quickly deteriorating, and that there will have to be some type of substitute economies that come in here as we move forward through whatever it is that we're going to move forward. And just to reinforce what Hugo asked me the question earlier of do I see positive outcomes here? And yes, I mean, despite the fact that I am a collapsnik and that I see this as a very devastating time for the species Homo sap, and that we are going to experience a lot of die-off, a lot of war, a lot of hardship. I don't see this as an extinction level event, at least not in the near term. Uh, as a species, we've been bound for extinction from the day we were born, just as every human being is bound for death from the day you're born. It's just a question of timelines and how long you can survive. If you look at it from the point of view of how long life has been extant on Earth, it's about 3 billion years old. Uh, and
More than 3
life,
billion.
well, 3.5 billion, whatever. Let's not pick nits on that one.
3 billion and a half. It's okay. It's fine.
Okay.
Maybe even almost 4 billion, actually.
Almost
It's
4
a
billion.
lot of time.
Okay, well, make it that length. I don't know. But Hugo himself brought up a graph that shows that basically the sun will be producing so much energy from fusion of helium in 300 million years that any eukaryotic life, at least on the surface of the Earth, will not be able to exist. So the maximum we have left is 300 million years.
No. We can. If we have energy, we can survive. We can move the Earth a little bit further away from the sun.
Right, okay, yeah, and we're going to build Dyson Sphere, and we're going to
No, the Dyson sphere will not work, but it's not so impossible to think that the new metabolism, the kind of metabolism provided by solid state systems, can survive even very high temperatures. So the Earth will be sterilized, I'm sorry, in about 300 million years. Actually, it will be more like 800 million years, but solar photovoltaic cells will not be sterilized. They can keep going for a couple billion years.
Okay, so there's going to be a singularity here. There's going to be a Ray Kurzweil scenario.
Not necessarily. Singularity is another thing. Completely different. I see photovoltaics as a source of power. It will be like a photovoltaic cell. It's like a steam engine. It produces power, and that's it. Then intelligence is a completely different question. You can be completely stupid, and you can still apply the recipes to make photovoltaic cells. It is not so difficult. It's reasonably simple, and this concept of singularity is a completely different idea that says that computers will become so smart. Yeah, what are we doing here? If computers are becoming so smart now that they're outperforming us already, so what are we discussing about? They will solve the problem.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't buy either argument. All right, Gail, you got any last words before we shut it off today?
Well, I guess the one point I'd like to make is that I think the way we head towards collapse is through low prices, not high. And we're seeing low prices on oil and coal and natural gas and electricity and on food products. And this is the direction that we get to collapse. And this is why it affects the financial system. There's an awful lot of people looking around for, the prices have to go high. There's going to be shortages, and people can't afford to buy it, and so the prices won't stay up with the cost of production. So we end up with electricity prices too low for the cost of electricity, and oil prices and natural gas prices too low too.
Yeah, that form of collapse does seem to me also to be the direction, and there are still people betting that the prices of oil will rebound. I bet I saw that an article on oilprice.com, I think it was, maybe it was Zero, that you've got futures contract people betting on $100+ oil coming back inside the next 4 years. I mean, the problem is the population at large can't afford the energy at those prices. Our real wages are decreasing. And and you're not just looking at the FS of A. You're not just looking at our own consumption. You're looking at this as a global issue. Oil and energy is a global consumption issue, and many countries are falling off the economic cliff now. They don't have any money to buy it at all. Italy, where Hugo's put up a few graphs on the Italian gas consumption, and it's dropping off the Seneca cliff. So.
Yeah.
So the low price scenario as the end game for energy does seem to be more likely than the ultra high price scenario that has been envisioned in the past. All right. Well, I'm going to thank Hugo Barty and Gail Tverberg for joining me again for this discussion. It was a very good one on analyzing the Renewable Energy Survey and renewable energy issues. We have a few different attitudes and concepts about what can work, what might work, and so forth. And then just to reinforce on the survey itself, by no means is that survey a survey of the population at large, although I sure would love to see what the results would be if you published it on USA Today or something like that. Not that that's ever going to happen, but that would be a very interesting sample to get. But at least a sample of collapsed people provides you some insights on what people are currently thinking about this and how they think we're going. One thing is, surprisingly to me, the near-term human extinction people did not show up in very large numbers this time, which surprised me because from prior surveys they have dropped in on the surveys and kicked in their 2 cents in greater numbers. They were only about 2 or 3% of this survey, so that was interesting. But at any rate, thanks everybody for watching today here on the Collapse Cafe. And just one more time, reminder: please hit that little button and make some contribution to the Sun Foundation and help us build a better tomorrow. And also keep these videos and discussions coming. And that's all the doom. This time until next time, here on the Collapse Cafe. Later, diners.